Muslim women, if anything, should take more risks. And what I mean by that is, especially if they're married, husband is the provider here. So actually, you actually have a privilege to actually take a risk. I think for me, the aha moment really came when I was, 21, 22, when I first broke into tech as an accidental tech co-founder, early London tech scene. So I'm talking 2012, 2013, and just going to these spaces and not seeing that representation, but also knowing there were others like us. So when me and the co-founder, Muslamic Makers, literally chatted over Twitter, he was working in tech, I was working in tech, and we're like, okay, there's a few others. And I think that was it. I think I always talk about, for me, the best community builders are selfish. And what I mean by that is that if you build for yourself, you're more likely to put a lot of more energy into it. So for me, ultimately, I was building for myself. I was building for a craving that I had, that I didn't see people who were like me.
When you think about Muslims in tech, what comes to mind? Maybe you think about the handful of successful projects like Quran.com or Tardil, perhaps. But imagine the power of bringing together all of those successful projects and more with budding entrepreneurs and creatives and the people from the Muslim tech community in one place where they have a dedicated space to thrive. Our guest today has built just that. Arfah Farooq is the co-founder of Muslamic Makers and Muslim Tech Fest, which is a tech festival that is taking the world by storm, both across London and San Francisco, and perhaps coming to a place near you. This is a place where the Muslim tech community can come together for the first time to collaborate, learn, and grow. Arfah, welcome.
Assalamualaikum.
So Arfah, you're using ChatGPT with your 3-year-old to create AI-generated stories for her. That's such a cool idea. How did that whole thing come about? How's your daughter taking it? How does it work?
She loves it. So I think the first time I did it was probably 7-8 months ago. I think I made a TikTok on it. It just kind of came into my mind where when I knew I could actually start generating images. So we just kind of I knew duck was her favorite toy. So I was like, okay, let's make a picture of a duck. And then she'll be like, ducky swing. So then we would put duck on the swing. Then she'll be like, ducky and sheep. And then we just start creating all these different images. I need to go back into my history because one of those images I actually want to get printed and put in her room because it's kind of like a really kind of nice story. But then when the voice activation obviously kind of came in ChatGPT, the latest model, then that's even more interesting because now she can actually talk to it, right?
Wow.
So now it gets even more interesting because then actually she's speaking directly to, ChatGPT. And then that's when, she can be more and more creative with it. And of course, I'm there guiding her. I'm like, okay, say this or say that. And I love it because sometimes when I'm using ChatGPT and she hears the voice, she comes running to me. She goes, Mama ChatGPT, Mama ChatGPT. Like she really wants to play with it. So it's so cool. And I just think there's just so many ways you can, people obviously always talk about screen time, this, that, etc. But I just feel like there's so many creative ways you can actually parent using tech and actually kind of give them a head start. So for me, just using that to be super creative, I just have a lot of fun with it, and I just feel like we're just scratching the surface. The more smarter she, the more older she gets, the more different ways we can kind of do things, or you can use ChatGPT to create a game or whatever it is. I just feel like there's so many fun things you can do, and I think a lot of it goes back to my nephew who's just turned 10. I introduced him to tech very early. I was introducing to cool coding stuff. He's now the kid on ChatGPT, using ChatGPT to code with Python and stuff. And it's really interesting to be actually that early exposure and where it's led him to today. So I only can imagine what it could lead my daughter to. That's
really cool. Arfah, you're the founder of Muslim Tech Fest, previously the founder of Muslamic Makers. And you're I think one of the integral people in the Muslim tech community, and I think that if we take a step back and we think about what role we play as an affluent Muslim community in the UK for the rest of the global Muslim Ummah, and within that bubble, the most high leverage community I think is probably the tech community, and the convening role that you've played in making that happen is I think bar none really, been very critical to so much of the value creation that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm really excited about the future as well in terms of where it goes. But my question to you is, what was your aha moment that made you get into this whole Muslim tech thing in the first place?
Sure. Alhamdulillah, I feel really privileged to do this work. I think for me, the aha moment really came when I was, 21, 22, when I first broke into tech as an accidental tech co-founder, early London tech scene. So I'm talking 2012, 2013, and just going to these spaces and not seeing that representation, but also knowing there were others like us. So when me and the co-founder, Muslamic Makers, literally chatted over Twitter, he was working in tech, I was working in tech, and we're like, okay, there's a few others. And I think that was it. I think I always talk about, for me, the best community builders are selfish. And what I mean by that is that if you build for yourself, you're more likely to put a lot more energy into it. So for me, ultimately, I was building for myself. I was building for a craving that I had, that I didn't see people who were like me.
And when you started, what was the initial hypothesis? I don't even know if you had a hypothesis, but what was the initial thought that, what am I doing here?
Yeah, it's really interesting, obviously, when you kind of look back on it retrospectively. I think for me, it was like, bring people in a room, inspire people, make people believe that they can do it too. And I think it was just as simple as that. And I think only if you see it, you believe it. And I think I knew there were some really interesting people around that time that were doing interesting things. I mean, some of our early events had people like, the guys from Onfido, and obviously they've gone on to become one of the biggest exits, unicorn exits in the UK, to people like Shaz, who were just starting out from Muz. But not many people knew them back then. And actually, by just bringing those people to the forefront, I think just kind of made people go, oh, wait, that is possible. Oh, I could do that. And I think that's really what it all ultimately comes down to.
If you were to reflect back now over the last several years, would there be anything that you would do differently, when you started off with Muslamic Makers when it comes to sustainability or business models, a younger Arfah, start of a journey, what would you tell her now?
There's so much I would have done differently. So when Muslamic Makers first started off, it was always very like, it's for the community, it's going to be free, everything's free, etc., etc. Don't get me wrong, I think it's brought a lot of barakah in my life, but also a lot of frustrations with the fact that, 9 years later, I'm still sitting there thinking, how do I keep alive? And that's really annoying, to know how much value it's created for the community. When I look back at other friends of mine who also built diversity communities for their kind of, ethnicity, etc., and I think about, okay, what is it that they did different compared to me? Is that they went all in, they created either consultancy around it or something. For me, it was like, MM's this nice thing, we do some meetups, and, maybe, and in the beginning, we were so grateful to these tech companies. Oh, thank you so much for hosting us, not realizing that we were the ones adding value to them, and that they're the ones who really wanted the diverse talent. But I was in this very grateful mindset of just so thankful, that not realizing that actually I was doing them a favor. So I think for me, it's just understanding that value right from the start and being able to be actually, to have access to this community, you've got to do X, Y, Z. Or even for our community, being like, you know what, it's not a big deal if I charge £5 for the tickets if it covers the food. And I think the problem is when you've built something for free for so long, that community gets used to free things. So then when you come in later trying to put something in, I saw an amazing community recently for South Asian girls to come together. And they did 1 month of just let's just do a few events. And then a month later, quickly, they monetized it. And obviously some people pushed back. And I commented on the founder's feed saying, you know what, well done. You did it so quickly. And she got the subscribers, and now she's got the sustainability of, 200 paid members at £5 a month or whatever it is. Boom, there's money there. There's money there now to pay the instructors or the people hosting the events or wherever it is, because it was just done so quickly. Whereas I think in my case, it was just I was like, no, it's fine. Oh, our food's being covered by the sponsors. It's okay. And then COVID happens, and then we start to try and do programs and stuff, and not realizing all this stuff, it's so much work. There's admin, if you're putting a program together, a startup course, a careers program, whatever it is, there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes. And there's only a certain level of momentum that volunteers can have. And then you go through these cycles of volunteers where, somebody is really excited about it, maybe they'll stick around for a year, but a year later you're recruiting again. And that energy it takes to keep recruiting and recruiting and recruiting, you get to a point where you're just like, this is too tiring. So I think looking back now, I'm just like, okay, like maybe I should have just been all right with charging £5 to come to the event, Like a simple basic thing as that, I think would have shifted the mindset. But I think timing is also very key as well. And unfortunately, I do sometimes feel I was a bit ahead of the curve. Like when Muslamic Makers started, it was like, 8-9 years ago, like very early. Even when I was doing my startup that failed, it was like very early. So I think timing also plays a part. So I can sit here and also go, but maybe, it's like Muslim Tech Fest could not have happened 9 years ago. The community is only ready for it now. So I think I've got to just understand as well that as frustrating it is, because obviously there's, these people like yourselves, other people, we were all coming up around the same time. And obviously I look around at my peers and I'm like, okay, well, they were quite smart. They did this, they did that, etc. Whereas for me, I just treated it like this nice hobby thing, not actually realizing the value it had back then.
Yeah. But I think maybe you're being a bit too harsh on yourself, because sometimes, we started in 2015, 2016, and I remember until 2019, in a way, it's quite the story is quite similar, that we made no money.
Yeah.
We didn't monetize it. I think we had like 500 subscribers, of which I was at least 5 of them with my different email accounts. And then I think when we did start monetizing it, you just have this really strong trust and level with your audience that then allows you to accelerate, I think, much faster, which I suspect is kind of the experience with MTF, right?
Yeah.
Where, because like if you hadn't done Muslamic Makers, MTF, I don't think it would have been anywhere near where it is.
We had something to launch pad off, right? We had this existing community that were interested in kind of Muslims in tech. So I think, alhamdulillah, like you obviously, everything happens for a reason. So that is the reason that it had to happen. But at the same time, it's sometimes I sit there and I'm just like, I'm starting a business again. Like, even though Muslamic Makers wasn't a business, it's still capabilities of building, right? So it just feels like I'm just like back to year one. But, that's what entrepreneurship is all about, right? There's obviously always a lot of failures per se before there is always one thing that sometimes takes off.
And I want to ask you, there's not many Muslims who are entrepreneurial, not many people, frankly, who are entrepreneurial and take that risk. There's, in particular, not many women who do that. And there's not many Muslim women who do that. What was it that made you do it? And why do you think we don't have as many women or Muslim women following the path that you forged?
I think for me personally, it was very accidental. And what I mean by, and actually I say accidental, but when I've spoken to other Muslim women entrepreneurs, they also say it was always an accident. I don't think it's something that we go out to do. It just sometimes happens. So obviously in my case, my first taste of entrepreneurship was this startup which spun out of a youth charity I was part of. I got a bit of investment and, I was like, oh, hey, I can pay your salary. Why don't you go full time on it in a year? And I'm, a newly fresh graduate. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, this sounds cool. So like, that was obviously like that first kind of taste of it. And then, but then always like, even like with Muslamic Makers, even though the money bit wasn't a part of it, still attracting people, doing the marketing, getting people to come to the event and stuff. So I think for me, it was very accidental, but I think it's coming up to a year since I went full-time on MTF in March. And I was kind of reflecting on like, okay, like it's all kind of happened and stuff. And there were certain circumstances which pushed me, things like stuff that happened in Palestine, etc. But I think for me, it was like also acknowledging the privilege as well. I'm at a point in my life now where I'm like, okay, alhamdulillah, I'm married. Okay, cool. Me and my husband sat down, we did the sums and we're like, okay, I can afford to take this risk. If I take this risk, it means no holidays, this, that, etc., right? And hopefully by this point, I can start earning what I was earning in my part-time job before. So it was like being able to do that, I think, first of all, I think is one of the reasons. What I might say might be a bit controversial, but I think Muslim women, if anything, should take more risks. And what I mean by that is, especially if they're married, husband is the provider here. So you actually have a privilege to actually take a risk. And of course, cost of living crisis, all of that stuff, I totally get it, But if the maths works, and if that means you have to sacrifice some luxuries where, the holidays or whatever it is, you do actually have a unique opportunity here where you could take the risk if you are obviously in that kind of setup. So I think there's that thing. And also even before I was married as well, right? Of course, my parents, went to university, did all of that stuff. But I maybe didn't feel the same level of pressure from my parents in that sense of, okay, job, this, etc. Yeah, sometimes my dad was a bit like, okay, what you up to? Like, she's up to something again. But it was never that kind of like, you know, thingy, like always being told, nope, you've got to go do this kind of job, etc. You know, and now obviously, mashallah, my parents are really kind of proud of kind of what I've built. And even back then when I did the startup, I like invited my parents to my pitch night because I wanted to show them like this new world, you know. So I think it's just kind of one of those things where actually the best thing, like in terms of like entrepreneurship, is really to acknowledge your privilege and see if you're in a privileged position. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put you in a privileged position, then almost you have to, you know, because there's somebody else that doesn't have that privilege. So if you have the capabilities to do better by your family or do better for your community because you've been put in a certain position, then I think like it's worth that risk.
In the 20s, for a young man and a young woman, I feel like it's a different experience. And I speak now as a elderly, you know, approaching my mid-30s. And I guess, you know, with women, Muslim or any women really, but Muslim women actually in particular, there's this kind of ticking time bomb, isn't there? Where you kind of need to get married and you've got your parents on your case. I don't know if it's fair. I'm interested to hear if it's true that that's probably, you know, at the forefront of most Muslim women's minds. And then career is typically second to that for most of them. Whereas I don't think there's as much pressure on the men. And I guess that probably reflects in the conversation we're having as well, right? So do you agree with that analysis? Do you disagree that that is, you know, what should be the status quo?
I think it's a generational thing as well. You know, our parents might have been from a certain generation. The kids in their 20s, their parents probably were born and bred in the UK, right? So I think there's a difference there in terms of expectations and stuff that happens as well. So I think there's that kind of going on. But I think if I think about my generation per se, I think definitely it is on the forefront, but not to the detriment of your career. I think they're both still happening at the same time. And I used to always say to like my friends as well, like the most hardest thing about once you graduate from uni as a Muslim woman is that you're not sure what's next. You have a job, right? You've got the job now. Nothing else is in your control now. Right? Before it's like, all right, I gotta go to college, I gotta go to uni. You know exactly, you have control over that matter. Once you've got your job, the whole like getting married, that kind of stuff isn't in your control. And that is very hard because you're super ambitious and you do stuff and, you know, you just make stuff happen. You get to this point where you're like, this is all in Allah's control. Like, I literally can't do anything. So I think that is always a very interesting time. And I think like when I've had friends that, you know, have gotten married early, I've had friends that have gotten married late, whatever it is, or late per society or whatever you want to call it. But ultimately it's like everyone just kind of finds something for them to like focus on. So some people might be like, all right, it's not happening for me, so I'm just going to chase my career or I'm just going to chase my business or wherever. For others, it might be something else. So I think it really kind of varies in that regards.
You mentioned that you know Shaz with his blockbuster startup Muz.
I knew it as Muz Match.
Yeah, as Muz Match. I think we're allowed to say it, but he's not. How did you meet your husband?
Yeah, so in my husband's case, it's quite a funny story. So I used to work at a coding boot camp. I was a marketer there. He happened to come do the course there, and so he came to do the tours. There was him, a black guy and a Bengali guy, the only minorities kind of around. We started just having lunch and stuff. Thought to myself, do you know what? At that time, I like made all these assumptions about him because he comes from a very kind of different upbringing, you know, private school, boarding school, that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, he's not that Muslim enough. All of this like assumptions. Slowly over time, just over lunches, kind of got to know him. He left. It was only a 3-month course. Had a feeling he liked me. And I thought nothing was going to happen. You know, you're kind of just still texting. And then I was like, right, I can't do this weird like limbo thing. Asked to meet him up. Told him I liked him. And so I've got to draw a line under it. And I was like, I'm telling you this. I know you don't have a job right now. I know nothing's going on. This isn't going to happen of this. But I've got to tell you so I can get over this. And he was just like, oh, not going to lie. You know, crossed my mind too. But yeah, like I've got to focus on this stuff. So I just thought that's just a nice guy way of being rejected. Alhamdulillah, 2 years pass. Happy New Year, Eid Mubarak. That's pretty much all we exchange. 2 years later, he kind of slowly comes back into my life. And then it literally just went like that. Like literally, I think we got our parents involved pretty much after 3 meetings. And it was like from my parents meeting to us getting married was 4 months. So it's like qadar of Allah. So yeah, a lot of people are like, what, you actually weren't told it? And I'm just like, yeah.
Sometimes you have to do that, right?
Right, yeah. So like for me, it's like, well, so did Khadija. Like at the end of the day, so like why not in that way? Yeah, it's just one of those things that I just Again, I feel like people have so many like assumptions about like the way you should navigate this like marriage stuff. And I think ultimately for me, it's like, you want something, you go get it. And in my case, it wasn't written, when we initially met, but it was written 2 years later. And that was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's timing, because those 2 years, then the things I went on to do within those 2 years, I needed to do.
Yeah, very interesting. I don't want to make this a marriage conversation, although I'm sure Shaz will be very happy with this. So the way I met my wife was I met her once, and I only had like a 10-minute conversation with her, and at the end of it, I just felt like I ticked all the boxes. So then we were like, okay, we're happy to proceed. And then she was the same, actually.
Wow, mashallah.
And that was it. So I got basically married after a 10-minute conversation.
That's crazy, but I guess if everything aligns, then why not, right? I mean, you're an investor, so you sometimes got to take those risks, right?
That's it. You have to roll the dice. And I guess in many ways, both of our stories are quite entrepreneurial in the sense of how we just decided to,
just go for it.
Yeah, do the unconventional thing. I wanted to, talking about entrepreneurship, talk about MTF, Muslim Tech Fest, and it's alhamdulillah, it's a company that ultimately creates events that are unapologetically Muslim for the tech community in London, in San Francisco, and possibly somewhere else
Hopefully
as well.
More, yeah, inshallah.
And it's going from strength to strength, which is fantastic to see. What are the challenges that come with being so unapologetically Muslim?
There's a lot of challenges. I think faith is one of the spectrums of diversity which people still don't 100% back. So when it comes to things like sponsorship, it's like, oh, the Muslim thing, we can't quite do that. So I think there's a lack of kind of, and that's why when we do have sponsors from the non-Muslim community that do come forward, we really do appreciate them, that they're kind of taking a risk in a way, right? To kind of work with something that's so like overtly Muslim. So I think there's definitely that side of things. I mean, the amount of times people have said to me, if you just maybe made it South Asian Tech Festival or focus on ethnicity or something like that, yes, my market will get bigger and all of that stuff, but I just feel it would just lose its essence. So, it's hard, which is why I'm like bullish on building for the community, backed by the community, that ultimately the community needs to pay for it. VI tickets or whatever it is, etc. Because that's the only way we can actually truly stand on a leg on our own without kind of feeling that, okay, if I don't say this, or oh no, if I said this thing about Palestine on the stage, this might happen, etc. So I think that for me is like a really important part.
Yeah, I remember being at an event where Palestine was mentioned, and there was a corporate on the stage, and that was the end of the Q&A session.
Yeah.
After that, which was very clinical. So we've got the average tech person, they understand what MTF is all about because they've been to lots of mainstream, shall we say, tech festivals and other festivals out there as well. But what about Uncle Faisal, who is one of the the front row people at the local masjid? He's in his late 50s, and he's got his iPhone, and he's using that, but he's just very confused about what MTF is. Why does tech matter? How do you explain what MTF does to him?
Yeah, so I think to Uncle Faisal is, I might remind him actually of the Islamic golden age, of when actually Muslims were at the forefront and were innovating, and they were the inventors, etc. And then I would paint a picture to be like, okay, now imagine that Muslims have all these tools, AI and whatnot, and actually we're now leading the change. We're leading the AI revolution. We missed the .com era. We missed the social media era. That's why I think it's so important that we Muslims create this next era and are the creators as well as the consumers, of course, as well.
Your expansion has been meteoric. In just 2 months, you just went from the UK to the USA, and you did a pretty very pretty damn good event over there as well. From what I've heard, I wasn't there sadly, but inshallah in the future. What was the difference like with the US market and the UK market?
So it's really interesting. So I think there was definitely a few angles. The thing that really shocked us was we were going as these like random Brits going into America to Silicon Valley and basically saying, hey, we're doing a tech festival in Silicon Valley. And I think we really caught a lot of the community, by surprise, because they were like, who are these people? Where did they come from? Etc. What we found was, what surprised me the most was actually we went in with a higher ticket price than existing community conferences over there, and people paid. And we didn't even have an agenda properly up. There wasn't even much. Yes, I guess we had like a bit of evidence from London in that sense. So people kind of knew, okay, they've done something in London. We didn't have like an agenda or a program like probably till like a couple of weeks before the actual event. But why did they like actually came? And when I spoke to them, they said, it's because you guys are so Muslim about it. And they said with the American Muslim identity, now it's getting there. But for a while, it was kind of like secondary, right? And I think the American Muslim community is obviously like so spread out as well. UK obviously is a smaller country, so we're kind of together a lot as well. So they really like appreciate the fact that like how overtly like Muslim and unapologetically Muslim we were. That I think kind of made them like pay attention. So I think that definitely was a kind of thing. And I also feel like, the fact that also American Muslims as well, maybe they have a bit more spending power or capital, etc., behind them as well. So they were also willing to kind of invest in it as well.
It must have been a very stressful time when you're doing your first event and then moving to an entirely different country and doing a second event. How does that fit in with being a mother? Because I know that as a father, it can be quite hard work, especially right now with Dawood in hospital as well. But the reality is that the mum always gets it a little bit harder, and the expectation is a lot higher on some of the cooking and some of the other stuff that actually takes up. It's like a job, right? And so how did you juggle between that, and how does that affect how you approach your work at MTF?
Yeah, so it was a very stressful summer to the point where I put on founder weight, It was late at night hours with, the US time zone, and there was just a lot going on in that summer. I look back on it and I'm like, whoa, we pulled it off. We're kicking start SF planning soon. I am not leaving it that last minute. But when an opportunity presents itself, you got to go for it. And I'm glad we did. But I think for me, it was okay, there was a lot kind of going on. And I think back then, so my daughter used to do half days in nursery. So my schedule was really crazy in the sense where it was okay, Tuesday morning she's at nursery, but in the afternoon I'll have her, then hand her over to my husband at 6 o'clock. He'll do the dinner in bed, and then I'll be working till late. So my schedule was very kind of a bit of work in the morning, afternoon off, etc., depending on her nursery days, etc. In one way, that kind of worked with the American time zone, because then if I was working kind of in the evening, then it was a bit more easier to kind of work on that side of things. So I was reflecting on this recently, actually, in the sense of, my daughter turned 3 in December, and those first 3 years, she's been going to nursery since she was 1, but it's kind of been 3 half days, that kind of schedule. And then everything else, even when I had a job, I was quite fortunate to do flexible working. I realized that we never used to actually sit together as a family and have dinner, because it was like a shift work. It was the moment, I was done, the kids being passed around, right? And the really nice thing, I know we're only in Feb now, is since Jan, she's now going 3 full days to nursery. It's the change it's had in terms of my family. We are having dinner together. I'm making roti. I have time to make roti, and just these little things that I'm able to do that I wasn't able to do before, because it was just this constant battle between trying to manage it all and then manage this business, and there's this expansion in the US and everything. So I think I'm quite grateful in a way now to kind of have a bit more of a schedule where actually I can go to the gym in the morning. I wasn't able to do that before, because it's if I go to the gym, by the time I get to my desk, I'll only have 2 hours and I have to pick her up from nursery again. So there was so much personal sacrifices I had to make in terms of like managing a kid and managing a business. Now with, the slight different schedule, it's kind of allowing me to enter, I guess, a new phase of kind of parenting in that way, where I feel like as a family, we're starting to be more of a unit, whereas before it was just pass the parcel.
There can sometimes be an element of guilt there, right? As a Muslim professional with a young child, anyone who sends their kid to nursery early, and I've been there as well. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's I think there's always that initial guilt, especially when they first start and when they just just turned one. Eventually they learn to love it. And I think that's the one thing you've got to remember. They've got to learn to love it. They're with people that they care. They're with other children. They're learning things, and they come back and you're like, wow, they learned that from actually nursery. So I think kind of being okay with that. And also, when you're also the first in your family to send your kid to nursery, there might be comments from other family members, etc., which sometimes can be really annoying, because you're like, okay, but you're not here to look after my kid. I've got to work. I've got to do that. So you kind of sometimes have to compartmentalize, comments, whatever it is from the community, etc., and just know that you are doing the best for your kid. Everybody has their own dynamics. Like for me personally, what's been really interesting is now that I don't have these half days with her, I have Fridays with her. I've always had Fridays with her. But now those Fridays I'm looking forward to them. They're actually special. Whereas before I'm like, oh my God, I've got a whole long day with her. Oh, I had it's just, especially when you're in that toddler, it can be a real kind of drag for some people. So it can be really long, it can be really tiring, etc. And actually, I would be the type of person who would prefer to work, but then you feel guilty if you're working and etc. And now she's obviously at an age where if she does catch me on the laptop where I'm meant to be, so she'll be like, Mama, stop working, and then that's when you feel it. So I think I'm a bit more conscious as well, where I very, very avoid trying to do any meetings on that Friday I have with her. If I do any, it's quickly while she's having breakfast, especially if it's related to sponsorship or anything like that. There's certain things you just got to do. But I'm more conscious of how I use my time and actually focus on the quality rather than the quantity. And I think that actually makes me a better parent for it as well.
Talking of sponsorship, we're obviously one of the sponsors, big supporters of MTF, and I think we companies like us need to do it. Question I have is, there's that song, isn't there? It's a man's world, and you're not a man, and you're a leader. What are your thoughts about how you're bringing, let's say, feminine energy versus the masculine energy that is percolating through the wider, industry or ecosystem, and sales in particular can be very masculine at times. How did you navigate that? What were the challenges? And ultimately, how did you find, a place of peace with it all?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I think it's recognizing your power eventually. So I think, how I spoke about earlier about that Muslamic Makers, I was in this very grateful mindset. I'll take pennies, not realizing my value of things. I think MTF is almost kind of made a lot of Muslim men take me seriously that may not have took me seriously before, because they just thought, oh, there's Arfah with her nice little community project, whatever. So I think when people kind of recognize the power, the influence, the value, and you also lean into it. I mean, I'm still quite soft in the sense when it comes to things like negotiations, but I'm also learning to actually sometimes, no, this is it. You're either in or you're out. It's as simple as that. And then they'll come running later or whatever it is, etc. Like you did last time. But I think it's just kind of one of those things. You just learn, you learn, and I learn, and also I respect it as well in the sense of we're all on a journey. And people take, you guys were involved in our first MTF, not the second one, but come back for the third and come back even bigger to support us. And I really appreciate that and really excited about kind of, our pitch competition that we're going to do together. So I think for us, it's we're growing and building together. And I think that's the one thing about this year's sponsors. There's a lot of Muslim companies like you lot, like others, that are supporting and understand that actually we need to build this thing together, because there's a value exchange on both sides. And I think when you recognize this value exchange on both sides, and for me, it's so important that I am giving value to my sponsors. And I think as a Muslim as well, I'm not here to just scam people out their money or anything like that. For me, it's okay, there's a certain crowd that I'm bringing that feeds their audience or whatever it is. Like, there's value, and I want to make sure I can give them that value. And if anything, I want to make sure I give them more, more in that sense, because it's the right thing to do.
You're talking to a female entrepreneur. She is doing sales for the first time, and she's, let's say, in her 20s. What would your top advice be to her?
It's really funny that you're talking about sales and me, because I hate, it's one of them things I don't like doing, but I realize I do it a lot, and it's like, okay. And now it's kind of like, I guess the kind of sales I'm lucky to be doing right now is obviously based on years and years of relationships, right? Years and years of relationships that are now converting into money. I haven't quite cracked the cold side of sales yet. But I think for me, the biggest advice I would give is just really kind of recognizing the value and really kind of telling the story properly and really buying people into your vision. I was thinking the other day, I was like, okay, over the last 10 years, I've raised investment, I've raised grants, I've raised sponsorship, and I was thinking about the amount of money that, alhamdulillah, I've had people believe in me. And I think a lot of it actually comes to the crux of actually the vision that you're selling and you as a person. And I think if you can really kind of get that across, then I think you can really, kind of get that money across as well. So I think it's one of those things, it's all learning. It's all literally learning. And you learn and you iterate and you're like, okay, alhamdulillah, last year was great. We built so many great case studies off the back of it. So now it's so much more easier for us to sell this year, because we're like, well, so-and-so came and this was the return, and so-and-so came, etc. So just learning those kind of mechanisms and tweaks and those kind of things, I think, have kind of really helped as well.
In my experience, I found that entrepreneurs, especially when they start, many of them fail, and then they go back into employment and life carries on. Those that pull through and stick at it through those 2, 3, 4 years of hardship usually have a chip on the shoulder. What's your chip on the shoulder?
What's my chip on the shoulder? I think, I don't know if, I'm trying to even understand the phrase chip on the shoulder. It's like something.
Who you're trying to prove wrong?
Oh yeah, who am I trying? I think I'm trying to prove myself wrong, in the sense of I feel like I finally deserve it. Alhamdulillah, I feel like I finally deserve it. It might sound a bit arrogant, but what I mean by that is I've worked so hard over the last 10 years. I'm almost like, come on, it's got to be my time now. It's got to be my time. So maybe that's what's my chip on the shoulder, that I'm almost trying to prove to myself I can do it. And sometimes I'm like, if it doesn't work out, the other thing I'm going to do is just soft life. I'm going to do consultancy, I'm going to do community building, I'm going to do speaking gigs, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's funny because when I went full-time on MTF, I thought I'd have more time for those things, and I just don't, because I'm obviously so laser focused on MTF currently.
There's so much value that bringing Muslims in the tech community together brings. And you've done fantastic work with Muslamic Makers, now with Muslim Tech Fest, people like Dean Developers and Home, and there's so many others now who are doing stuff, which is brilliant to see. What is the value that you think innovators and startups and entrepreneurs and large corporates can get from these kind of gatherings and communities?
I think ultimately with grassroots communities, you're really catching people at the start of their journey. And when you back people at the start of their journey, there's just so much you can kind of get onto it, right? When they go on to become unicorn founders and whatnot. So I think if you can really gather and harness that talent right at the start, then I think, you're in it for the long haul. The sad, unfortunate thing is with grassroots community building, it's hard work. And then there's no real money in it. Even if you try and make sustainable business models, you'll try and experiment. And ultimately, I would love for MTF or other organizations or other Muslim organizations to be in a position where we can fund these grassroots communities, because they're not official charity status type organizations, where they can do donor campaigns, and even that requires a lot of work, right? I know you had funders and good, I was on the SVA Academy, etc. So I learned a lot through that for Muslamic Makers, and ultimately landed that, Muslamic Makers is just going to do its thing. And if I ever wanted to turn it into something, I'm then creating another job for myself. Mm-hmm. So I'm not in that position to do that now with my focus on MTF. But what I could do is, if I really could grow and make MTF, inshallah, a success it would be, is get to a position where then I could keep a lot of these grassroots things afloat. And I think that's often actually the struggle as well.
How can MTF be a launch pad for a budding entrepreneur?
Yeah, so a launch pad in so many ways. So this year we are doing the pitch competition sponsored by you guys, which I think is just going to be phenomenal, because I think specifically there's such a gap, right? Like, this is a really exciting time for Muslim builders, right? You've got AI, you've got all these tools at your disposal, right? When I started Muslamic Makers 10 years ago, the biggest question I had was, I need a technical co-founder. Do you know someone who's technical? You can be the technical person now, right? You've got everything at your disposal, which means we can launch quicker, etc. There's some amazing Muslim founders I know out there who have built a product, put something out there, maybe even start generating a bit of revenue. The gap they have right now is they can't take that leap yet. Maybe they've got family responsibilities, etc. They can't get that first raise, right? So actually, what if MTF, actually gives that kind of first initial check, which then allows them to raise off the back of it, right? Because then all of a sudden they're like, okay, they've got 30K or whatever committed, then it's so much more easier to be able to do that. So I think we're really, really excited about doing the pitch competition, because we just see that there's such a massive, massive gap there. And then I think, even if you're not at that stage yet, coming there, meeting people, having ideas. What was really special about London and having done London and SF, there's two co-founders, one sitting in SF, one sitting in London, and we've built that bridge, between them, and they're building something together, etc. And I just think there's just so much like magic to happen. And I think it's just infectious. Like, when you're surrounded by people like that, you really do walk away again thinking, okay, cool. If it was something you didn't know how to do, you probably learn how to do it now. And I think that for me is where it gets really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's really brilliant to see how much the Muslim tech community has progressed in just 2 years, I think. I remember being at certain pitch events maybe two years ago, and you're looking at the lineup of startups, and they're not that appetizing, frankly, and they're well-meaning, but they're not there yet. Whereas, this year or this last year, pretty much everything that I've been to, a lot of them are investor ready, or they may have already raised some funds. And then you've got people who perhaps are even outside of these pitch events, who are raising, very serious amounts of money and, larger rounds. And then all of that know-how starts, and that network starts percolating through the ecosystem. I think it's probably the most exciting time for the Muslim tech community. Like, I genuinely think in the next decade, we're going to see a few unicorns come out of the work that you've done.
Yeah, inshallah. And and likewise, the ones that we've already seen that have made it, I already know that they're starting to give back, privately. And I think that's the biggest thing I think we all need to remember in terms of our intentions, is that, when you do make it, find a way to give back. And hopefully financially, because that is the biggest gap, but of course skills-wise, etc. too as well.
Looking forward now, Arfah, what does the Muslim tech professional want to see that perhaps the Muslim tech professional of 5-10 years ago wasn't as focused on? Like, what is this new generation of Muslim tech professional looking at?
I think the new generation is ultimately looking at how to really lead. And I mean, so obviously we spoke about founders, but there are some great Muslim tech professionals working in really big tech companies, right? They are instrumental. And it's very easy for people to say, oh, you're working for Google, you're working for Amazon, or they did this, they did that. But when all of this stuff kicked off in Palestine, they were the ones to make sure the shadow banning wasn't happen. They were the ones. So there's a lot of power to be had on the inside. And I think this is the thing that we really need to recognize as a Muslim community, that we all have a role that we can play, and we all have a superpower. Some people are in parliament, some people are working in tech companies, some people are founders, some people, are community builders like myself. And it's almost like, okay, like we need to be everywhere. We need to really, really be everywhere to actually really have that influence and power in that way.
Absolutely. I think, jumping off the back of what you've said, sometimes we can, at some level, glamorize certain roles, like the role of the entrepreneur or the startup founder, or, you're doing something in a particular industry. But actually, you need everyone to come together, and each of us have their own specific skill set. Like, I don't think you could do what I do, and I don't definitely know I can't do what you do. And it's trying to support each other, I guess, in developing that ecosystem, which I think is happening, alhamdulillah, for the first time. which is brilliant to see. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think it's there's two things, right? It's moving away from a competition mindset to collaboration mindset, and the whole abundance mindset, which was really the word that came out of San Francisco, especially for the UK folks that flew out to SF. And I think even myself, I was reflecting on it recently, and I was just like, the moment you catch yourself getting into a scarcity mindset is the moment you start to lose. And you just need to really kind of remember that abundance mindset, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give you a lot. And, there's a lot of the pie to go around per se. And actually, if we sometimes just keep trying to remember that, it can be really hard because it's like we're all operating within a niche. So you're like, how niche can we get, right? So, but I think we just have to keep remembering that. And I think if you keep remembering that, and if we really kind of work collectively, then that's where the power is. The moment we don't do that, the moment we're just off doing our own things, I think is the moment we start to lose.
How have you seen the adoption of AI within both your space, which is the event space, but then also within Muslim tech community generally?
I think AI is just kind of used in every way, right? So I think, in the event space, it's everything from kind of, coming up with a brief, coming up with this, etc. You can use it in so many different, help me come up with the agenda, whatever it is, etc. Right? Things are just kind of executed way quicker. I mean, I use it everywhere. For everything, literally. Like, it's like, okay, cool. And, I have a bit of a neurological brain as well. So for me, it really kind of helps in that regards as well, because it's like, okay, let me just brain dump and then it'll figure out what I'm talking about, So I think that for me is that is really great. And then I think in the Muslim space, there's so many different ways. There's the intersection of kind of faith and AI as well, which I think is a really interesting debate and discussion, right? There's people like Dartil who are obviously really using it in a really innovative way in the sense of kind of mistakes and dictation. But then there's people saying, okay, but if people use it to seek knowledge, what if the AI model is hallucinating, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I used it recently to rewrite some of my du'as using Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name, right? That's one of it's one of the things that everyone does before Ramadan, et cetera, where people might sit down and be like, okay, et cetera. And of course, I was like, okay, I'm doing this, but let me just quickly cross-reference it, let me just quickly fact-check it, just in case, And then you're like, wow, that literally took 2 seconds. But then I was listening to another podcast, and it made me realize something where I was a bit like, okay, yes, that took 2 seconds, but if I took an hour to actually research Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names, maybe I would have deeped them more in that way as well. So there's, to and fro's in terms of actually how we use it. If I had to use that hour, maybe I would have never got around to doing that, because that hour just felt like forever. So sometimes it's actually, what's the quickest thing that will get me to, moving my faith forward in that way? And if it is the use of AI, that's not a bad thing.
Amazing. Arfah, looking forward to the next 5 years, where can we see MTF heading?
5 years? Oh, gosh. So for me, I think really, I would love to be in a place where we, inshallah, have at least 4 events around the world. And those 4 events are creating a bridge between each city and creating this kind of global tech Muslim ecosystem. So I think that is, for me, if I could kind of achieve that sustainably as well, in the sense of it always happens, people know it's happening, etc. I think for me would just be a huge achievement on getting it to a sustainable, profitable level.
Arfah, it's been really nice having you. If people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can reach out?
Yeah, so probably LinkedIn. You could just find me on Arfah Farooq, also kind of on TikTok, Arfah Farooq, etc. And then, of course, there's the Muslim Tech Fest pages as well.
Brilliant. And if there was one final piece of advice that you would leave the Muslim tech community with, what would it be?
Just do it. Don't be scared. Literally, just start. I think that's the biggest thing. Just start. Don't overthink it. Just start. Because in the tech age, it's a race. So just start, iterate, start doing something, and you'll land somewhere, inshallah.
Amazing. Folks, if this has been inspiring for you, if you've taken benefit from it, then please do make sure that you like the video, you subscribe to the channel, you follow along Arfah on all the different platforms she's on, and share it with your friends, your family, maybe the people who do tech in your community. Maybe you've got some younger siblings or people who you think could actually be inspired by this story. Please share it with them and let us know in the comments below your thoughts on all that's been discussed. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.